Wednesday morning. We have Indigenous Outlook. Morning, my co-host, Courtney.
Yeah, morning, Flavius. Morning to our guest, Kasike Kalaan.
Yes,
and
our
to our
guest.
listeners and viewers
Welcome,
of the Real Stuff
welcome to Real Stuff, Kalaan. Welcome.
Salut, Khalid. Good morning, relatives, and greetings. Kalaan Nibonrix Kaiman here, Chief of the Yamaye Guani Taino people. An honor to be here.
Wonderful. Very good to have you. Very, very good to have you. Let's start out by asking you to tell people a little bit about you, your new title, and all that.
All right. Well, I am Chief of the Yamaye Guani, which translates as Jamaican hummingbird, Taino people. My investiture ceremony took place in 2019 at Charleston, and the abridged version of the long story that led to that is in 1992, a resurgence had started for First People descendants of the Caribbean on a whole, because the narrative was similar, this narrative of extinction of the First People of the Caribbean. And it wasn't just here. I mean, I have relatives, indigenous relatives in Central America and other groups that also, you know, the narrative is that they are extinct. And in 1992, when the United States and some other places north were celebrating 500 years since discovery, the indigenous communities came together and decided that, you know, something needs to be done to show that we are still here. We need to make a statement. And while sharing our own fireplace, this took place in Ecuador, different indigenous groups, they realized that there was a common thread. There was a prophecy that everyone had that was similar. You know, this returning of the people, this returning of the teachings to help the globe, help humanity. We see that the main advocates for, you know, the environment and as it relates to climate change are the indigenous peoples, the custodians of these spaces and these lands. So from that birth, one of the things that brought everyone together, which was the Peace and Dignity Journey, it's an intertribal prayer run which connects indigenous people from all the way up Alaska down to all the way in Argentina. And I represented in 2016 along with Sister Kasabiana Dankofie to represent Jamaica, and I participated in honoring our Taino ancestors. As the ancestors themselves would have it, is that while participating, there's a lot of things that I learned, a lot of sharing with other indigenous communities, those from the Caribbean, like Borinquen, Puerto Rico, Quisqueya, Dominican Republic, Cuba, and it really reinformed some of the things that I would have seen and experienced in my home, in my family, and some things here on the island as retention. And leaving from that, I was charged to really create a space that would facilitate the coming together of the indigenous people here on the island. And from there, I went to go through those protocols, you know, to connect with the elders, go through certain rituals, etc. And that culminated in my investiture ceremony in 2019. So since then, we've been growing in number, growing in awareness, growing in outreach. And I'm happy to say that, you know, the technology that exists that has been supporting our community has also grown. You know, in the days of my grandparents, there wasn't DNA tests that they could do, or it wasn't that accessible databases to the genealogy to trace the specific, you know, family names or individuals that are known to have had what we call island Arawakan or Taino ancestry. So the movement is a lot stronger now and really looking to preserve and protect what we have garnered and what we have been maintaining throughout the ages.
The first question I want to ask you is, I don't remember the year, but one year the Charleston Maroons decided to create a Taino Day, the first time that they did, and the first involvement of the Taino in the Charleston Conference Maroon celebration. Were you at that conference?
Yes, I was at that conference.
Okay, okay.
That
Because
was 2014, I believe.
Yeah, a lot of things happen there, you know, where people start to realize that what we learned in school was so much untrue, you know, so much lies. In fact, yeah, some Taino people there who actually cried because they got a chance to accept their you know, heritage, you know, to say, yes, we are Tainos and we are here, you know, because apparently before that, and because they were known as a dead people, they didn't want anybody to know. Can you say something about that?
Yes, Flavius, and you know, that goes to the theme of the show, the real stuff. So the real stuff on that is
Yes, really.
Our ancestry or heritage or trauma in Jamaica is unique amongst Caribbean indigenous people. We have had two colonizers. We have had the Spanish and we have had the British. The Spanish did not find the quantities of gold here that they were seeking. So their desire was to settle here, to make home here. With the indigenous people that were here, the reality is that we did not get the harsh treatment as they would have gotten in Kasike. We did not get the harsh treatment as they would have gotten in Borinquen. The Spanish folklore is that you do not travel on the sea with women. So when they came here and they brought their cattle and they brought their pigs and some of the first vaqueros was the term they used for cowboys, were actually the island Arawakan people that they were found here. And what happened is that they took as wives the indigenous women that were here and they settled. When they wanted more people to work on their estates, on their farms, etc., they would have tried to import more people from the African slave trade, not in the large numbers as the British had done. And when the British came, the enslaved were released. Now, this is the first place that the narrative started to switch, because in the minds already, which is a saddening thing, once people hear the word enslaved, they automatically assume that it's only people of African ancestry. So the indigenous people that were here were released as well. And along with those that had African ancestry, went up into the mountains to communities that were already established, communities of people that were not enslaved, communities of people that were aware of when the Spanish were doing their scouting missions, communities of people that when the wild boars were released and they moved with the spirit of the arrow that we call Simara or Simarabo, which the word Cimarron came from, would have been the first Maroons. So from there, you ended up having two groups of people. You had the Cimarron in the mountains, and you had those on the coast that had some European mixture, right? Some were taken to Cuba, and some stayed here and created fishing villages. And to assimilate, if they were dark skinned, they would say that they were freed people of color. And if they were lighter skinned, they would say that they were white. That has been the narrative that has passed on. So we know who we are, but there are certain things that were said to allow us to hide in plain sight. Because even when slavery was abolished, there was the exotic slave trade. There was taking of women from our islands here and carrying them to Europe. And, you know, that's why we have a good community contingent of people, descendants that are in Europe as well. England, Germany, all of these other places. So these things happened. And the trauma from the extinction narrative affected our people, affected our families, affected our way of being. So when the call came to create the community, I was really honored. I mean, every opportunity I get, I thank Bohita Siba Naru, Tekina Katia Toa, Tekina Eri Naru, which is Erica Nigan Gwedrin. She was also at the 2014. And Tekina Katia Toa, Diane Frankson Golding Frankson was also a part of that 2014 Charleston Conference. And, you know, they presented themselves as elders and supported the rituals that were required for the return of our community. Because the narrative that we have is that our people dispersed, but we were never really disconnected. So it is reconnecting now in this time so that we can preserve and protect our ways. You know, the fishing villages kept our fishing practices, the making of the fish pot, which, you know, archaeologists call the Antillean Z-trap. Those in the mountains still use, and we still use, Jamaicans still use the calaban, you know, which was used to capture coney. We still have our hamaka, or hammock making. We still have our barbacoa, which was used to prepare the jerk chicken, as we call it today, thanks to the influence of the seasoning and spicing from our relatives that, you know, remained in the mountains, the maroon, the cimarron. So now, as we come together, we are trying to preserve and protect our ways and our spaces in the present. But as I said, it's something that was traumatic, having to deny who you are for so long, and the ridicule that was received whenever people in the past, you know, elders would step forward and speak towards who they are, and the relief that now, you know, there's this awakening, acknowledgement, and also for those who require it or desire it, there's genealogy and DNA that can confirm some of these things we've heard. I mean, they found a tooth of a woman in the Bahamas, and on dead match, people have been mapping and testing their DNA results with that and confirming that, no, you don't just have Native American DNA, you have Native Caribbean DNA.
So the Caribbean native people, the Tainos, any relationship to the American native people and the Canadian native people? Was there the mix between the North America and the Latin America, South America, Caribbean situation?
Caribbean people are known as people that have been, you know, intermarriage, intermingling, mixing for way before Columbus came. I mean, that's where the even concept of Taino came from. I mean, that was just a moniker used to designate the people of a specific time period. But before that, you had Igneri people. Before that, you had Siboney people. All of them groups of what we call island Arawakan. So you'll hear me say that term interchangeably from time to time, because that's what we are. You know, you have the mainland Arawakan people, which have various groups as well, and you have the island Arawakan. Or territory, as you'd call it, went all the way up to Miami. So it is not surprising that you'd have people that intermarried and intermixed with the indigenous communities in Miami. And then following that, as I said, the exotic slave trade, indigenous people are taken from the United States here and to the Dominican Republic, people from here to the Dominican Republic. There are records that show all of these things. There are records that show these things during the Spanish time period. You know, they got this amount of mulatto, this amount of Indian, this amount of blacks on their cargo and their freights. So yes, that happened. And it continues to happen today. I mean, I know indigenous, Caribbean indigenous people, Taino people, Boricua people, Kiskeano people, and Yamaye people that today their partners are Mexica, or they're half Mexica, meaning that they're connected to the Mayan or the Aztec Empire from Central America. I know people that in our community, their family, part of their family is probably Mosquito. It comes from Nicaragua, and there are Mosquito Indian descendants here. They're Cherokee descendants here in St. Elizabeth around Treasure Beach area. So yeah, I mean, the thing that has happened is literally our perspective has been put in this black or white concept, and we have lost a lot of knowledge and awareness of who we are completely as Caribbean people, all of us, because it's our heritage as a result. So growing up, people would either, you know, try to understand more about their European ancestry and not really look to find out, so what is these other things and what are these other aspects of who you are? Things were normally ascribed to one tradition, either it was an African tradition or it was a European tradition, and not really honoring the stuff that are retention of this island.
Well, with the conversation now heavily dealing with Maroons and sovereignty, I mean, nobody can question the Taino people's sovereignty. But what's your take on this whole situation? Where the Tainos fit into this? Because there's not a much conversation about the Tainos and the whole sovereignty situation.
Well, the reality is, Flavius and Courtney and listeners, that there's a lot of education that is required across the board. I must say that I'm honored to have connected with a lot of indigenous relatives throughout the region to have a better understanding of what is meant when you speak towards sovereignty. So to clarify, you have tribal sovereignty, which is what Native Americans normally speak towards, which is different from just being a sovereign nation, so to speak. So for example, in the United States, the relatives that we have that have their reservations, they have autonomy, they make their own decisions, they have their own police, just like states in the United States would have their own sheriff. But at the end of the day, there's still the federal government that has certain laws. So when it comes to adoption and other things, it still has to go up another level, and there's an agreement. So there's a sitting at the table. So our community sits on Y.C.O.I.L, which is really just another level of the previous Maroon Secretariat to include the Taino people. And it means the Yamaye Council of Indigenous Leaders. And with them, that is what we're pushing for, to really have those discussions for the collective indigenous people as it relates to our tribal sovereignty, and to have modern mechanisms put in place in policies to protect our people. Now, the purpose of these things that have been set up for the world, for the United Nations, is that without these systems to protect our people, without these systems for tribal sovereignty, the intangible heritage, the intangible aspects, the culture, the music, or systems of decision-making, or spirituality, all of this would be lost because it would be engulfed in the things of dominant society. So that is why that sovereignty is required, to preserve what was and to allow us to develop systems so that we can preserve this on our own. It is not a desire to be cut off from anyone else, but is to allow the sustenance of our ways and to share our ways with the rest of common society that are beneficial, like our farming techniques, like our fishing techniques, like our planting techniques. Our sustainable development goals is a big thing now because of the 2030 goals that the United Nations has put in place. And to zone in on your question, where do the Taino fit into this? Well, I can say, and it was said during my investiture ceremony, that we have what we call Y.C.O.I.L ceremonies with our Maroon relatives. Other than having, familial ties, intermarriage, we also had Y.C.O.I.L ceremonies. And Y.C.O.I.L ceremony is like a blood relative ceremony. And these are ceremonies that we take very seriously. And these are what our ancestors did. It means that whatever they feel, we feel, and whatever issues they have, we have, and vice versa. And the territories that the Maroons have today are territories that, well, at least during the time of the treaty, were territories that were entrusted in faith, in love, in honesty. And today that is something that is respected and honored. And we stand in alliance with our relatives to defend that. And likewise, we receive from those colonels that are part of Y.C.O.I.L their support in protecting our ancestral sites, our ancestral spaces, as we move towards that. Our way of moving with these things is, at the right time, then a lot of more things will become public. but there's a lot of joint work that is being done so that things are done in a proper way for future generations. So we are relatives. As I was talking to you earlier about, you know, the term Cimarron, which is where maroon comes from, and its root being Cimarabo, which is that spirit of the flight of an arrow. You know, the term comes from an Arawakan term. We are connected. They have all right to claim indigenous like anybody else, because we are one.
You have given us some serious information today that I'm sure most of us didn't know, you know. One of them is the whole exotic slavery thing. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yes, all right. So the exotic slave trade, what would happen is that when slavery was abolished, what would happen from time to time is, you know, human trafficking was still an issue that we have today. So they would term it exotic because it was normally people that fitted into an indigenous phenotype. So they were taking people from the Americas and carrying them to Europe, and people from North America and carrying them to places in the Caribbean, etc. But most of it, as I've heard from the elders and that I've seen in the research, was them carrying people to Europe. Some they would try and, you know, have forced labor. So the forced labor in those times was more like dancing and bars, working bars, and all sorts of stuff that was really demeaning to our women. Was what was being done back then. It's not to go work in any plantation, because, you know, these are times post Buccaneers, post pirates, you know. So it would have been in that peak of that human trafficking period. And as a result, you know, some would have gotten away from those scenarios and they had their descendants and they kept that narrative and that understanding of who they are. And when we put out that call for our people, we got those responses and we were able to connect. You know, some of the stories that we've heard are quite interesting, you know. They thought that there was a period in time also when there are a lot of promises. So even though we might look on it now today and categorize it as exotic slave trade, that is because we can look in hindsight and see what it was. But it was just some man come down, some white man come down, we know how he go flavious, and then promise these women and these people a better life and them children, right?
Happening today.
Yeah, and them end up in another country and don't have no way to come home. And it's them descendants way after they do a DNA test or something, and then, you know, they get so emotional when they get to learn about certain aspects of who they are and where they're coming from, and they just have this strong desire to connect with the Caribbean. And that is where, you know, keeping our traditions and ceremonies are necessary to help them to recover and to heal and to find them place.
Yeah. Maybe you'd like to tell us something about what's coming forth for the Tainos.
Well, what I can say publicly.
What events are you planning for in 2022?
All right. So what I can share publicly is that we support the Maroon communities, and we found it quite interesting that a lot of their celebrations align with our celebration based on our cosmology and our calendar. So this year, you know, our New Year is May 26th. That for us was when investiture ceremony took place, and that day was chosen because it's for us symbolic the start of the rainy season in the Caribbean. So, you know, that with that comes new life, and we look forward to those things. So May 26th, we'll be having our celebration in Woodside community, which is one of our Taino communities that has, you know, several what you'd call heritage sites there, from the church that is there, from the Daddy Rock site where the enslaved would gather to drum and to share in ceremony, to the ancestral gardens, the Taino steps, and the Atabe petroglyph by the dog cave systems. So that's a very sacred site. You know, sometimes as Jamaicans, again, when we don't understand that indigenous part of our heritage, we don't realize how much we have to be happy for and proud of. You know, we retained our indigenous name. That's a tick. 2, we still have some of these ceremonial sites. So that petroglyph site in Woodside, that is like our version of a pyramid, and it is still here. But how many people know about these things? So, you know, we want to bring awareness to that and to help to protect and preserve.
That's why you're here.
Exactly,
Tell us
that's
more
the
about it.
You
Would you have pictures or videos that you could send to us that we can display from time to time?
Of course. We'd
Please
proudly do that, and we'll keep you guys updated on, you know, our activities throughout the year.
Because this platform is indigenous, this section of it, and everything indigenous. And you know, we're giving this platform to all indigenous people around the world, especially ones that are tied, you know, to the Caribbean region. And as you know, we have been doing quite a lot of work with the Garafunas in Belize, and now we have another group in Trinidad, you know. So we and all over the place, you know, want to bring forth, and of course Africa, you know, bring, you know, the people from Africa and what is happening there, or it relates to us out here, because we are their diaspora. So, you know, and to see what we can do. Courtney.
Yes, Flavius. Kasike, just a quick question though. What is presently being done to preserve your language? Because we know that if we don't use a language, it dies. So, you know, just give your people some information of what is happening in that area.
We have a language resurgence group that we're working with, and there's a dictionary that is going through its final stages before it comes out. So to help people understand that, as I said before, the true terminology would be that we're Island Arawakan, and that's the branch of the Arawakan language that we speak. And for us, we call it today Wahiani, because it is our words that we recognize and we were able to survive, you know, recorded in various places, in various dialects. And then from that, we're able to extract Arawakan, Island Arawakan words from the Garifuna language. So it's interesting that you mentioned the Garifuna who are our relatives, because the Garifuna's woman language was Arawakan. The men language would have had more Caribbean influence or Carib influence, which is similar of the Kalinago people, because they took Arawakan wives, Island Arawakan wives. So we're able to piece together.
Those are the people in Guyana.
Dominica. The Kalinago is Dominica. Waitukubuli.
Dominica, but there's another group in that we spoke to in Guyana.
The Lokono.
Who have a similar language to the Garafunas.
You have the Lokono, you have the Wapishana, because that's what I said, you know.
I think it's the Lokono, the Lokono, yeah.
Yeah, because if I say Abba, they all know I'm saying one. If I say Biama, if I'm counting, we all count the same. You understand?
Okay.
There's certain root things that are the same. So to show you a simple breakdown between our language and the Garifuna, is that there are certain words that the Garifuna, they will use a G instead of a K. So once we were able to decipher that, it was easier for us to see the commonality. So in the Garifuna, in Garinagu, when they say us, they say Wagia. In our language, when we say us, we say Wakia. Okay. So it's not that far apart.
Yeah.
Once the people come together, you can make sense and you can realize that, you know, it's not that far-fetched or difficult to piece together. Last year, we on Taino Day that the National Museum of Jamaica, they did a feature on the Taino language, and we shared some words that are retention words in English today. And we taught a little bit of Wahiani or Island Arawakan language. So we're looking forward to doing more projects and workshops and things of that nature to share some more, because it is so, for me, I find that it is easier for us to pick up on speaking this as Jamaicans because of our patois than probably some Spanish speaking and some others, you know, because we use me, fi me, for you, for them, for we. These pronouns and how we use them is quite similar to how we would use those in Wahiani. So, friend, Tio, you have Datio, my friend, Butio, your friend, Natio, dear friend, etc. So when I had put them on a table and I showed, and I was asking the children, they were getting it. They could figure out how to say these things because I compared it to our patois.
Yes, yes. In fact, what I would love to do, I would love to invite you and somebody from Garafuna and somebody from the Guyanese group
Locono.
there, Locono, and the Dominican, and so we can have a discussion of the language and the similarities.
Mm-hmm.
Something we can look at, Courtney, and try to schedule.
Yeah, surely we'll look into it and explore it.
We have made contact with all of these people already, and we know that there are differences and there's a lot of similarities. So a show like that, I think, would be very informative to the outside world and everybody, even the inside world. I don't know what you think, Kalaan.
Yeah, I mean, last year I was on a panel with some Locono and a Garifuna sister that was put on by the Jamaica language unit up at UWI. And
okay,
what you're saying is, these things are of interest and benefit to all of us. So it should not be, and that was the issue before. These things remained in the realm of academia, right?
Yeah.
And everyone has interest in these things, right? Maka is an indigenous word. The average person don't know that.
I don't know that. But the good thing is now that the Real podcast has the facility to make that happen, and we're going to jump at it immediately.
All right, beautiful.
We can make it happen. Yeah, man. Yeah, man. So thank you very much for joining us today. As we are kind of running out of time, we have to invite you back because, you have one show can cover all that you can tell us. And people want to hear, and we would love for you to and next time when we invite you, probably can bring somebody with you. So, so we can get in some more information, more diverse information. So Courtney, you want to sign up first?
Okay, just to say thanks again to Kasike Kalaan, or the Taino Chief of Jamaica. And today we spoke, about the trauma, that your people has gone through, what they have experienced. And, you also talk about the renewal and preservation of the culture. And I know that, as Marcus Garvey would say, people who have lost their language and their culture is like a tree without roots. And surely, it is very important. Culture is very important. Also the language. And we spoke about the language, and you talk about the research that is being done and a proposed dictionary that shall come out shortly. We also talk about the workshops and things that you have planned to expose this language. And surely today you have given us a wealth of information, I know, as Flavia said, we have to have you back on the show, to give us some more, because I know that people in the beginning, I thought that the Taino people has died out because that's what we learned in history. And I'm glad you come and, set the straight. Thank you again.
Yeah, man, thank you very much. So as we close off, we're going to ask Lubafu, the
You lead us to Fula. You belong far away away. Ajuguala, Lebabu Seru. Lida mua, lida sungfula. Lida mua, lida sungfula.
Well, unfortunately, this is it. Till next time. Bless.
All you gotta do is just speak. One word is enough, and I'm no longer so rough. I forget what I was trying to say. I no longer do what I was gonna do, but you're no good for me. That's why me know what set me if it go flee. Me have to take away me say.